So how do you go about finding adventure in everyday life? Hi everybody, I'm Rob and this is Storm Crow Overland. We talk about going on adventures, road trips, camping, and just generally getting out and enjoying life. This week we're going to talk about finding adventure in everyday life. There's really two ways this kind of works out. There's ways you can try to find adventure, and sometimes there's ways adventure is going to find you. This video kind of came about because this past weekend, I had to run. I currently live in Oklahoma City. I'm from the Houston area originally, and I had to run down to. We had a death in the family, so I had to run down to Houston for a funeral. Um, Not generally what I would consider an adventure trip, not a fun trip, but I was bound and determined to try to at least enjoy myself a little bit. There's always the circumstances are always horrible, but if nothing else, it's nice to see family. Catch up with some people that you maybe haven't seen in a little while, but I'm going to start by talking about the ways that I tried to find, ways to find adventure in that everyday kind of circumstances. You're going on a trip like I was, a trip that's not necessarily a fun trip, something you kind of have to do, but there's little things you can do. What I did was I know some places because I've made this trip many times. I know some places to stop and get some fun food that I can't get all the time. So they're a little too played out almost at this point. It's almost like a running joke, but I like Buc-ee's, and Buc-ee's has a brisket taco that you can only get at Buc-ee's, and you can only get it if you get there in the morning. They don't do it at lunch. It's just for breakfast, and it's just chopped up brisket meat in a tortilla, but it's so good. So I made sure I got to the Buc-ee's in Denton early enough that I could get a fun snack, just to try to add a little bit of fun to my trip. And that's the same kind of thing you can do if whether you're going somewhere you're familiar with or somewhere new, but it's like I said, it's not a fun trip. Keep an eye out for something new to try, whether it's food, maybe a new route to take. Maybe if you've got a little bit of free time, you can find a trail to go hike or a dirt road to go explore. There's little things out there you can do just to try to add a little bit of adventure kind of spice to stuff. Uh, Other things when I was thinking about this, other things you could do to try to have a little more fun to kind of mix things up like that. If you are, say you're old school and you are always like a paper map guy, and you're going somewhere and you've got your map and you've planned your route out, you know, maybe this time use the GPS on your phone, use the GPS in your car, or vice versa. If you're one of those people that types in the GPS every time you're going anywhere, maybe get a paper map out, kind of plan out a route, actually plan it out on paper, try to follow the map, uh, just to give you something a little different. And if nothing else, you'll get a little bit of a little extra skill out of it. You might learn something. You may just something that can kind of prepare you for something else in the future, maybe. Other things to ways to try to find some adventure in your everyday life. We generally when we talk about overlanding, we're thinking of long, week long trips, going out off the grid, out primitive camping. Not real far out there. A couple of weeks ago, we went camping. My family went camping with another family, and we basically went to the equivalent of a state park and stayed in a designated campground with with facilities and everything. And no, it's not like your typical overlanding camp out. But man, that is the perfect time to try out new gear. It's a low threat situation. If things don't work out, it's fine. It's not a big deal. You're not going to get left stranded, or you're not going to get be hungry because you couldn't figure something out. But like I said, it's a great time to try out new gear. That's where I took my Gazelle tent out for the first time, just in case something with it didn't work out right. Right, there was a problem with whatever it is. It's a good low threat way to try something new, get a little bit of adventure out of it, uh, without really putting yourself in a bind. And then one of the last things I really kind of thought about, if you're going on a road trip, especially if you're going on a road trip with another vehicle, if you're a couple of you in a convoy, this is a great time to practice talking on your GMRS radio or ham radio if you have them. That's not something a lot of people really spend much time doing. They don't really practice it. I've been on a couple of group rides where there was radios involved, and you had some people that were just too shy to talk on the radio. You had other people that bless their heart, they're great people, but they don't know when to shut up on the radio just because you're not familiar with it. It's not something you do all the time. So that's another great time to practice talking on the radio. If you have two vehicles, and you have some radios you can use, it's just a great way. Like I said, it'll kind of spice up your everyday little trip. So that's just some examples of ways you can try to find adventure in your everyday life. Uh, the thing you got to watch out for is sometimes adventure wants to find you. And when I say adventure finding you, this is when things happen that you didn't really plan for. The kind of key to this, to making it an adventure and not an emergency, is being prepared. And whether that preparedness is um, having tools in your vehicle and knowing how to work on things, having a first aid kit, or just having the right mindset of, hey, this is, if something happens, don't let it ruin your day. Let it, remember, this is part of the adventure. Uh, what the way adventure found me on this trip that I took down to Houston, got about halfway down there, and it's the middle of nowhere, and the battery light came on in my dash. Oh, that's weird. And on my radio, it's got like a built-in diagnostic thing, and I switched it over, and I looked at my voltage while I was driving, and the voltage just kept dropping and dropping. And I knew in my head, I started kind of thinking real quick, and I was like, well, it's pretty much got to be the alternator. And I'm kind of in the middle of nowhere. Luckily, there was a small town about 15 miles down the road. I was able to make it to the small town, and they had one parts store. I pulled into the parking lot, um, constantly worried that the Forerunner is just going to cut off on me because the battery's low. I mean, voltage was down to right around 11 volts. It kept dropping like to 10.9 kind of range. I was getting real worried, but pulled to the parking lot, had them come out, test the alternator. They're like, yep, alternator's bad. Uh, Went in. Luckily, thank goodness, they had one. They had one in stock. And so the first thing I did was, okay, bought the alternator, came out, started getting my tools out, and sounds silly, but started looking on YouTube on how to change the alternator on a 4.7 liter V8 Forerunner, because I'd never changed the alternator on this. Luckily, it's not too bad. It ended up taking me a little while. It's kind of tucked up in there. Had to get some stuff, unbolt other things to get them out of the way to pull it out of the bottom, but it worked, and I was able to switch it out. Return my old one to get my core charge back, which is always nice. Get the new one in there, get it up and running. Uh, Something interesting, back to that preparedness part. By the time I got the new alternator in, and between driving there, switching the alternator, the battery was low enough once I got the new alternator in that it didn't want to start. But luckily, back to that, I had tools. I was prepared. I also had one of the little jump packs, and pulled it out, hooked up the battery, hit the on button, gave it a little bit, gave me enough juice to get the Forerunner to start up, and then it was great. It was great for the rest of the trip. No more problems. But that could have been a disaster. I could have been stranded hours away from anybody that I knew that could come help me, in the middle of nowhere. I could have missed the whole funeral. Just the whole thing could have been horrible. But by having some knowledge, being prepared with some tools, it kind of just became an adventure. It was just like, oh, okay, cool. This is where I'm at now. This is what I need to do. And at the end of the day, I've got a cool story out of it. I mean, things happen. But part of it is that mindset. You have to not let it ruin your day. By the time I got to the funeral, actually, I had to go. We went to the wake first. Funeral was the next day. I get down there. I'm talking to family and telling them the story of what happened. And at first, everybody was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry that happened to you." Well, it's just part of the adventure. It, Feeling sorry for me would have been if I hadn't known how to deal with it, or if I hadn't been able to get an alternator, or if I hadn't have had tools. Because I was prepared, it's my buddy Carlos driving by. Hi, Carlos. Um, if I hadn't have been prepared, disaster. By being prepared, it was just a little adventure. It was just a little side trip, a story I can tell down the road, and it's not that big a deal. And then we give it just a second. We got some guys riding by dirt bikes that been out fishing. That's one of the neat things about my neighborhood is we have ponds, and The kids are always out fishing, so we have some kids ride the dirt bikes around and go fish for a little bit. But other ways that adventure might find you, and it can be adventure if you're prepared for it. We talked about talked about my situation where I had a breakdown, and same thing. If alternator can go out, starter can go out, your battery can die, flat tire. Um, are you prepared though? If you've got a lifted vehicle and bigger tires, is your jack big enough that you can change the tires? Um, do you have a spare that's the right size? Do you have a spare at all? If is your spare aired up? Do you have a way to air any of the tires up? Do you carry an air compressor? Um, Something else I always carry just because of this is a tire plug kit. I can plug a tire if I need to. It's not a big deal. I've done it lots of times. And then other things that can be an adventure if you're ready for them is road closures. It's happened to me before. Like I said, I have a lot of family down in the Houston area, so I make that trip pretty often. Uh, there's been times and there's a bad wreck and the highway's closed and you get diverted off the highway and you don't have a clue where you're going. You may or may not have cell signal. So do you have maps downloaded? Because that's a route I go often. I keep Google Maps downloaded on my phone so I can access them with no signal in case I'm just in one of those areas with no signal. I also keep a backup paper map in my Forerunner because that's somewhere I go pretty often. If I was planning a big trip out to Utah or Colorado, I would make sure I have these things too, just because I want to be prepared and be ready. And then a final thing that I was thinking of when I was kind of going through all this in my head that would be a way adventure might find you is, I'm going to say, minor injuries. No one ever wants to get hurt, but things happen. I mean, somebody could cut a finger or slam a finger on the door or something. Little things like that. That if you're on a road trip and you don't have anything with you and there's no Walgreens around the corner, do you have Band-Aids? Just simple stuff. Do you have some gauze? Just a way to kind of clean it up. These are things that if you're not prepared can really just ruin your day, can ruin your whole just regular trip. Not a big adventure trip, but can just ruin what you're out doing. But if you're prepared, it becomes a little bit of an adventure. Hey, so and so hurt their whatever, but we were able to bandage them up and keep going, and then they were all cool, and now you have a story to tell. You never want anything to go wrong on a trip, especially on a trip that you're not doing for fun. If it's something, I hate to say something you have to be doing, but if it's something you're not you didn't choose to do for fun, whether it's work or a family obligation or something like that, you really don't want things to go wrong and mess it up. But sometimes those are the things that make the best stories. If if just taking my last trip I did down to Houston, if everything had gone perfect and the car hadn't broken down and it, I would have probably forgot about the trip 2 weeks later. It just would have been gone. But stopping and getting a cool snack somewhere that I can't normally go to, and tell people, oh yeah, I had to fix I had to fix my alternator in the parking lot. It's stories. That's where the adventure comes from. The adventure really is sometimes when things go wrong, and that's okay. So I encourage you to find ways. Just be open-minded so you can find ways so you can find adventure, but also be prepared and have that right mindset for when adventure finds you, because it will. Whether you want it to or not, whether you're prepared or not, those situations are going to pop up. Things are going to happen. And I hope that for you, you're prepared and you're ready and they can be an adventure and not a disaster. This video may be a little shorter than some of my other ones. It's been a crazy week between that, my kid's birthday, and everything else. So like I said, this video may be a little short, but it's just something I wanted to share with y'all. If you like what we're doing here, you can find us on you can find me on Instagram, YouTube. You can find a podcast, all that kind of stuff. Just look up Stormcrow Overland. I really appreciate like, comment, subscribe, follow, any of that kind of stuff. If you've got any questions for me, feel free to look me up on any of those and send me a message. If you've got an idea for something you want to hear me talk about, go ahead and reach out to me. Several people have, and it's been great. I've turned them into videos. But And if you are listening to this as a podcast, we also release the video on YouTube. Just look us up, Stormcrow Overland. And if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're interested, we release the audio as a podcast. You can find it wherever good podcasts are found. Just search Stormcrow Overland, and find out, like I said, also on Instagram at Stormcrow Overland. That's really about all I have for y'all. Like I said, sorry if this one's a little on the shorter side, but it's just kind of what I felt like sharing this week. And realize sometimes you have to go out and maybe get lost and have a little adventure before you can find yourself. Thanks for watching.